Howdy, partners. Ever wonder if those Hollywood cowboys are the real deal? You know, the ones who always seem to have a perfect tan, a spotless outfit, and a horse that never gets tired? You know, the ones with the pearly white hats and the shootouts every Saturday? The ones who always seem to have a witty one-liner ready? Well, saddle up, because today we're busting the biggest myths about cowboys that Tinseltown got all wrong. We're diving deep into the heart of the Wild West to uncover the truth. We're gonna separate the Hollywood hogwash from the honest truth of the Wild West. It's time to get real about what life was actually like for those rugged cowboys. We're talking about the real grit, the real grime, and the real stories behind those dusty trails. The kind of stories that don't always make it to the silver screen. You see, folks, Hollywood's got a way of romanticizing things, and the cowboy life is no exception. They paint a picture that's more fantasy than reality. They'll have you believing that every cowboy was a sharpshooter, quick on the draw, and always ready for a duel. But that's just part of the myth. But trust me, the real cowboys, they were more concerned with keeping their herds fed and watered than they were with gunfights at high noon. Their daily lives were filled with hard work and long hours. So, hold on to your hats, folks. It's time to ditch the Hollywood script and uncover the real deal about the cowboys who lived and worked in the Wild West. Get ready for a journey back in time to see what it truly meant to be a cowboy. Now, Hollywood loves a good shootout, doesn't it? You know the scene, the dusty street, the tumbleweeds blowing, and two steely-eyed cowboys facing off at high noon. The music swells, the tension builds, and then, bam, lead starts flying. It makes for great cinema, no doubt about it, and hey, I'll admit I've enjoyed my fair share of those classic westerns. But the truth is, folks, the Wild West wasn't quite the gunslinging free-for-all that Hollywood makes it out to be. Don't get me wrong, life back then was tough, no two ways about it. But those cowboys, they were more concerned with getting the job done than they were with gunplay. Their days were spent herding cattle, mending fences, and contending with all the challenges that Mother Nature could throw at them. Shooting? Well, that was a last resort, not a daily pastime. These were hard-working folks just trying to carve out a living, not gunslingers itching for a fight. Now, I'm not saying there weren't a few scrapes and scuffles out on the range. Life out there was tough, and tempers could flare up just as quickly as a prairie fire. I mean, you put a bunch of folks together in tough conditions, there's bound to be some friction, right? But more often than not, cowboys had to rely on each other to get through the day. The truth is, most cowboys relied on their wits, their grit, and their fists long before they ever reached for their six-shooters. They had to be resourceful and tough, using whatever was at hand to solve problems. Think about it. A gunfight might make for a quick ending, but it could also land you in a heap of trouble. A single shot could change everything, and not always for the better. A dead or wounded man, that's a whole lot of paperwork and explanations. And in those days, paperwork was the last thing anyone wanted to deal with. And trust me, the lawmen back then, they didn't take too kindly to unnecessary bloodshed. They had their hands full keeping the peace without extra trouble. No sir, those cowboys, they knew the value of a hard day's work and a peaceful night's sleep. After all, a good night's rest was essential for facing the next day's challenges. They understood that cooperation and common sense were far more valuable than a quick draw. Working together was the key to survival in such a harsh environment. So while Hollywood might love a good shootout, the reality of cowboy life was a whole lot less glamorous, and a whole lot more about hard work and survival. It was about enduring the elements, managing livestock, and making it through each day with your wits intact. Now I know what you're thinking. Mike, you're telling me those iconic gunfights never happened? Well, I'm not saying that. There were definitely moments of danger and violence in the Wild West, just like there are anywhere else. But to paint the entire era as a constant gun battle, that's just plain Hollywood exaggeration. The real cowboys, they were more likely to be found breaking a sweat than breaking out their pistols. Remember, these were folks trying to build a life for themselves, not win a duel in the street. So, the next time you see a Western movie, remember to take those gunfights with a grain of salt, or maybe a whole shaker full. The real cowboys, they were tough, resourceful, and hardworking, and their story is a whole lot more interesting than any Hollywood shootout. Now, let's talk about fashion, or at least what Hollywood would have you believe is cowboy fashion. You know the look, those elaborately embroidered vests, those pristine Stetson hats. those boots that look like they've never seen a speck of dirt. Don't get me wrong, those actors look pretty darn good strutting their stuff on the silver screen. But if you think for a minute that real cowboys were out there on the range dressed like they were headed for a photo shoot, well, you've been hitting the sarsaparilla a little too hard. See, those fancy duds, they might look good in the movies, but out on the open range, they'd be about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Real cowboy fashion wasn't about making a statement, it was about practicality, durability, and comfort. It was about clothes that could withstand the elements, the long hours, and the rough and tumble nature of the job. It was about function over fashion, every single time. So, what did real cowboys wear? Well, think less rhinestone cowboy and more rugged outdoorsman. The Hollywood image of cowboys often glamorizes their attire, but the reality was far more practical and utilitarian. They wore clothes that were built to last, clothes that could handle the dust, the dirt, and the constant wear and tear of life on the range. Durability was key, as their clothing needed to withstand the harsh conditions they faced daily. A sturdy pair of denim jeans, often patched and repaired countless times, was a staple. These jeans were not just a fashion choice, but a necessity for protection and comfort. A simple cotton shirt, usually faded from the sun and sweat, provided some protection from the elements. These shirts were lightweight yet durable, perfect for long days under the sun. And a good wide-brimmed hat, not just a fancy Stetson, was essential for shielding their eyes from the relentless sun. These hats were practical tools offering shade and protection, and let's not forget the boots. Now these weren't your fancy, polished boots you see in the movies. These were tough, well-worn boots, often resoled and repaired, designed to protect their feet from the rough terrain and the occasional rattlesnake. They were built for endurance and safety. These clothes weren't about making a fashion statement, they were about survival, pure and simple. Every piece of clothing had a purpose, and was chosen for its functionality. They were the uniform of hard-working men who relied on their gear as much as they relied on each other. Their attire was a testament to their resilience and the demanding nature of their work. Now I understand the appeal of a good-looking cowboy. Heck, I've even been known to don a cowboy hat myself on occasion. But it's important to remember that the Hollywood image of the flashy, fashionable cowboy is just that, an image. The real cowboys, they weren't concerned with looking like they just stepped out of a fashion magazine. They were too busy doing the hard work that kept the West running. They were mending fences, herding cattle, and facing the challenges of frontier life head-on. So the next time you see a cowboy on the big screen, all decked out in his finest Western wear, remember that the real cowboys were more concerned with grit than glitter. You know, Hollywood's got this funny way of painting the past. When it comes to cowboys, they seem to think the Wild West was whiter than a fresh coat of primer. You've seen the movies, right? John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, all squinting at the sun in their 10-gallon hats. Now don't get me wrong, those fellas made some entertaining films. But the Wild West? It wasn't exactly a casting call for a John Ford flick. The truth is, the West was about as diverse as a rodeo clown's wardrobe. You had folks from all walks of life, all colors, all backgrounds, chasing their own version of the American dream. And that meant cowboys weren't just cut from the same cloth either. You had black cowboys, Hispanic cowboys, Native American cowboys, all working side by side. They didn't care much for Hollywood stereotypes, they were too busy dealing with the realities of life on the range. Take Bass Reeves, for example. Former slave, became one heck of a lawman. Tracked down outlaws with a skill that'd make a bloodhound blush. And he did it all while looking more badass than Wyatt Earp in a gunfight. Then there was Bill Pickett, the son of a former slave who invented the rodeo event of bulldogging. That's right, bulldogging. He'd leap from his horse onto a steer, grab it by the horns and wrestle it to the ground. Now that's what I call a day job. And let's not forget the vaqueros, the Hispanic cowboys who taught those Anglo fellas a thing or two about roping and riding. They were the original cowboys, really, working the range long before the Wild West was even a twinkle in Hollywood's eye. These are just a few of the forgotten faces of the Wild West, folks. Men and women who lived and breathed the cowboy life no matter what their skin color. So the next time you watch one of those old westerns, remember, it's only part of the story. The real Wild West was a melting pot of cultures and colors, all bound together by the hard work and grit it took to survive on the frontier. The cowboy story, much like the American story itself, is one of diversity, perseverance, and ultimately, unity. It's a reminder that the frontier didn't discriminate, and neither should we. It's about time we celebrate the real cowboys, in all their gritty, diverse glory. They deserve our respect, our admiration, and most importantly, our honest portrayal in the stories we tell about the Wild West. Because the truth, as they say, is always more colorful than fiction. Alright folks, let's wrangle in another Hollywood horse apple and expose it for the phony it is. You see those buckaroos on the silver screen spending all day, every day in the saddle? Makes for great cinema, sure, but it ain't exactly rooted in reality. Truth is, being a cowboy was about as glamorous as mucking out a stable, which, by the way, was probably on their to-do list right after breakfast. They weren't called cowboys for nothing. Those critters weren't gonna herd themselves, and don't even get me started on fence mending. Barbed wire, the bane of any cowboy's existence. You think they were perched on their trusty steeds while wrestling that prickly devil into submission? Nope. More likely, they were hunkered down in the dirt, pliers in hand, cursing the day they signed up for this line of work. Now, I'm not saying cowboys didn't know their way around a horse, they did. But a good portion of their day involved plain, old-fashioned walking. Miles and miles of it, under the scorching sun, usually covered in dust and sweat. And you thought your commute was rough. Try navigating a herd of stubborn cattle across miles of open range, on foot, with nothing but a canteen of lukewarm water and a prayer. Then there was the matter of branding, vaccinating, and ear-tagging calves. Trust me, getting up close and personal with a skittish, 1,000-pound animal is a whole lot easier on the ground where you've got a fighting chance. So, the next time you see a cowboy on TV, riding off into the sunset, remember, he probably spent the better part of his day with boots firmly planted on terra firma. Let's face it, horses, while magnificent creatures ain't exactly built for every chore on a ranch. Ever try maneuvering a horse through a dense thicket? It's like trying to parallel park a school bus in a phone booth. And speaking of tight spaces, good luck getting a horse inside a barn to fix a leaky roof. Sometimes you just gotta ditch the four-legged transportation and rely on good old-fashioned human ingenuity. So, while those Hollywood cowboys were busy galloping across the plains, the real deal knew that sometimes the most effective way to get the job done was one step at a time. And that, my friends, is a truth worth remembering. Alright partner, let's mosey on over to another Hollywood tall tale that's about as accurate as a blindfolded bullseye. You know, the drill lone cowboy rides into town, cleans up the place, rides off into the sunset, all without breaking a sweat. Well, hold your horses, because the reality is a whole lot less glamorous and a whole lot more cooperative. See, cowboys, tough as they were, knew they couldn't do it all alone. Out on the range, it was all about teamwork. Think about it. Rounding up thousands of head of cattle, driving them across unforgiving terrain, all while contending with rustlers, stampedes, and the occasional grumpy chuck wagon cook. You'd need a whole posse just to keep your sanity. Cowboys relied on each other for everything from roping and branding to standing watch and sharing stories around the campfire. They were more than just co-workers. They were brothers in arms, bound by the shared hardships and triumphs of life on the range. And speaking of sharing, let's not forget the importance of the chuck wagon. Now that chuck wagon cook, he was the heart and soul of the outfit. He kept those cowboys fed and fueled up, which was no small feat considering they were burning more calories than a blacksmith in a volcano. So, while Hollywood might have romanticized the lone cowboy, the truth is, these rugged individuals were part of a tight-knit community. They depended on each other for survival, and that camaraderie, that unspoken bond, well, that's the real heart of the Wild West. The lone wolf cowboy might make for a good story, but in the real world, it was the pack that thrived. They watched each other's backs, shared their meager rations, and offered a helping hand when times got tough. And trust me, times got tough. From blizzards to droughts, from stampedes to cattle rustlers, Cowboys faced a whole passel of challenges. But they faced them together, drawing strength and resilience from the bonds they forged on the open range. So, the next time you see a lone cowboy riding off into the sunset, remember, he probably left a whole crew of hard-working compadres behind, each one playing a vital role in the grand, messy, and undeniably human story of the American cowboy. Well folks, that's a wrap on our little myth-busting rodeo. We've busted more Hollywood myths than a bucking bronco in a china shop. Remember, the real cowboys, they were more about grit than glitz, more about hard work than Hollywood heroics. Thanks for riding along with us today. If you enjoyed busting these cowboy myths, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more Wild West wisdom. See you next time on Cowboy Chronicles.